I don't know if I like Game of the Year nominee Metaphorrefantazio. Before I defend myself, I want to start with this. So I think you'll agree, video games are an awesome way to spend your free time. They improve critical thinking, they allow us to become part of a community, and they allow our imaginations to blossom. That being said, free time isn't so free. It's something that we all have to use wisely, because it's not something that we have a ton of. We all know about opportunity cost as well, or FOMO, fear of missing out. All of those time-saving / missing out concepts that we have are all relevant here. I referenced those in my Stardew Valley video, calling opportunity cost Stardew Valley's greatest villain. In fact, it's the villain of most things in life. All of this to say, I am now going through the hoops of Metaphorrefantazio trying to decide if it's worth that time. If that opportunity cost is large enough that maybe I should be doing something else. Now there's a part of me that thinks, well, if I'm even having this thought and I'm not so enraptured by the game that I wouldn't even think about this, then that right there is a red flag, and I certainly have considered that. So, to come to an answer, I looked through my gaming catalog, I pursed through those dusty pages to find my answer. I needed the present and the past to come to a conclusion. So when it comes to Metaphorrefantazio, I can't stop thinking about Final Fantasy and Majora's Mask. Strangely enough, if you haven't played. I won't have much in the way of spoilers, but let's just say that this game is, to me, a love child of these two games and a few others. These games meant a lot to me and many others, so to compare this game to those is surely a positive, right? Well, in some ways, yes, but also, there's a saying that goes, comparison is the thief of joy. But I find myself comparing Metaphor to those two an awful lot. So why am I robbing myself of this joy? Is it because I want a different type of joy? Why am I letting this thief into my house? Speaking metaphorically, no pun intended. Now, the Majora's Mask comparison doesn't go much deeper than the fact that there's a moon-like figure bearing down on you, and the use of time limits. It also feels similar in the way that the game uses that sort of time limit. You know, it's a common Persona thing, but in this game it has more of an intense, a doomsday factor to it. It's not quite like a Persona game. They don't really have that impending doom. I mean, sure, you'll lose the game if you don't beat the dungeon by the time whatever day is up, but it's not so much world ending or there's going to be a new king that slaughters half the population. Stuff like that. It's just not as much of a grand scale in Metaphorrefantazio when you compare it to Majora's Mask and the moon bearing down on Termina, ready to crush the entire town and world. I love both art styles, very different, but that's something I really love about them. The character designs too, they're just quirky and interesting, and it really does feel like it's from another world, which is cool. The dungeons are interesting so far in Metaphorrefantazio, and again in both games, but there's still something missing in Metaphorrefantazio. So Majora's Mask is obviously much smaller, but as you move through the game, through the use of time-traveling mechanics, you can take your time, and somehow it even feels cozy. And that's part of the appeal of the Persona games for me. They're cozy. I don't think this game was trying or wanted to be Persona, so, that's totally fine. But there's no time to breathe. In Majora's Mask and Final Fantasy IX, they give you time to breathe. Now, I know that between dungeons and so forth, there are days where you can hang out and just talk to people, but it doesn't feel real in a way. It's as if the interactions you're doing, you're not really bonding with these people. You were just kind of brought together by a random series of events, and now for some reason this random protagonist everyone's rallying around, even though the protagonist doesn't seem to be worthy of such a rally. What this game needs, like I was saying, you need to be able to relax and reflect on your adventure, the R&R rule. It's a rule of gaming that I think is neglected in these high-intensity, high-writing-styled stories. Metaphor appears to be missing the rule. Relax and reflect. In Majora's Mask, obviously we have the time limit, but then you also have scenes or areas like the Astral Observatory, where the music itself is enough to calm anyone down and make you feel like you're in outer space. make you feel like you're free of the moon's harm. Even with a demonic moon bearing down on you, breathing down your throat, when you're in the astral observatory, you don't think of anything else besides what's happening in there and the astronomer. To circle back to the cozy point, I want to be clear that Majora's Mask's dungeons aren't cozy. They're pretty inhospitable and unforgiving. But they shouldn't be. It's the moments with the villagers in Clock Town and seeing them over and over again that is cozy. As the player, you start to develop sympathy and compassion for them. You feel part of a community. Even if Clock Town is tiny and the inhabitants only ever do the same things spread over 3 days, it's still cozy. I know it's weird to say, I feel weird saying it, a game where the world ends every 3 days is cozy, but it is. It's the use of the time loop system, though, that allows you to relax and be cozy. In action-adventure games like this, that relax and reflect rule is necessary. It's even necessary in horror games, too. It sort of goes along the lines of the less is more approach, which allows for horror games to be so effective. In other words, you need relaxation to be able to be afraid to let your guard down. And the same is true in Majora's Mask. You need to have that ability to relax so that your fear of the moon never quite fades. Otherwise, if it kept killing you, if you kept watching that cutscene of the moon crushing Termina, you'd learn to not fear it. You'd learn to tell yourself, it's just a cutscene, and then I'll be able to play again. It's just a game after all. But the real beauty is when a game makes you forget that. All that being said, metaphorrefantazio is a much grander adventure than Majora's Mask, but even then, it differs from other great adventures like Final Fantasy IX. Take a town like Daguerreo in Final Fantasy IX. It's an optional town, but there's not much story point in going there, and you won't really encounter much trouble, maybe on the way there. But once you're there, it's just an interesting place, and cozy, it's a library, so of course it is. While you're there, you can hear some great stories and take some time to reflect on your journey thus far. It's just a big old library. The lower level is flooded, which is a cool little environmental storytelling addition. It offers a chance to you to relax and reflect on what you've done thus far. We also have Clara. It takes a bit to get there, and it can be dangerous to get there, but once you're there, it's beautiful. And the light pouring in on top of the trees, it almost forces the player to take in the beauty, to relax and to reflect. There's a lot of dark lore behind Clara, but when you're there and just walking around, it allows you to look in the mirror and be like, holy cow, look what we've done as a group, and enjoy what you've had. Metaphor hasn't had that for me. Metaphor also reflects Final Fantasy IX in its grand adventure and very interesting cast of characters. The Gauntlet Runner and Nurse, aka Cid, are straight out of Final Fantasy. Especially the Final Fantasy IX Cid, they have a lot of similarity in their designs. Even just the little time between when you're riding the Gauntlet Runner to a destination feels like a Final Fantasy airship trip. Some little sequence between travel that I feel like I've played before in that series. Now I was looking back and I don't think Final Fantasy IX actually had a proper airship sequence where you could walk around, but it easily could have. It would have been perfect for the game. It's a sort of classic war story / anti-war story. You know, a band of ragtag monkey wrench gang style group are kidnapping the princess to play their part in the war and to stop the war. It's a bit like Metaphor in that sense. You have a very grand operation. You have a large war between nations. In this case, it's between kings and the races. So it's similar in that sense, the political sense. It also has some Final Fantasy XII to it as well. In Metaphor, it's a bunch of random people all centering around saving the prince, and it's an interesting goal, but it doesn't quite have that same sense of purpose or interesting origin story to how the characters met as Final Fantasy IX. And hey, I used to really like this quote I heard once. It's, "You can only grow so large in someone else's shadow." And I realize right now I'm putting metaphorrefantazio in Final Fantasy IX shadow, but I don't think that's a bad thing to do, because how the game is designed and how it's structured is bringing my mind to that point. So perhaps it's not individual enough for me to actually distinguish it on its own. It's an interesting thought. But a big thing that I can't help comparing it to in this grand adventure style of story is the main character. Metaphorrefantazio does not have the same style, same oomph of a main character as Zidane in Final Fantasy IX. It suffers from the Skyrim problem. For some reason, this Elda is the chosen one. It's no fun in a way. In Final Fantasy IX, you're a thief, a goofball, and a good guy. You want to stop the war. In Metaphor, you're a bit lackluster, and people have to constantly save you. You do save people too, but you're the chosen one. And often your dialogue choices don't reflect someone who should be followed, if you ask me. They're very unassured, and they don't inspire confidence a lot of times. Even when the actual text that you click on appears like it may be a confident statement, the way that the lines are delivered are unassured. And I haven't finished the game, so maybe the protagonist will come into their own, but even so, even now they should be more confident, or he should be more confident than he is, to get this many people to follow him. I just can't see that he's warranted enough, besides having the Seeker archetype power, to inspire this confidence and to get these people to follow him. There are so many times when I question why people are following the soft-spoken, half-committal protagonist. It's a bit of a problem because, well, the protagonist, that's me. There are games where the chosen one is done right, like Ocarina of Time, where Link says nothing, but his actions do the talking, and the way that people talk about him and that the world builds around him builds up his character. Final Fantasy VII is another. This isn't a silent protagonist. Mass Effect, Dragon Age Origins are a few examples of games that I think do it well, that have a character that actually speaks where you choose the dialogue options, and there's someone who inspires confidence. They feel like a chosen one. They have depth, and you can create depth for them. This particular protagonist, it doesn't really feel like that. Metaphor just really has me confused. Just the fact that I'm comparing it to these two games, two of my favorites, is a good sign also. But the fact that I'm comparing it to two greats also means it might not be doing enough on its own to be great. I love the combat. That's something I really enjoy. The hybrid style combat where you can either just fight or you can go turn-based if they're a stronger enemy. The archetype system is interesting. The design of the menus, the enemy designs are interesting, and the way you fight them is very interesting. Using the weapon types, sort of like Fire Emblem does, where a sword is going to be super effective or strong against an axe, and that'll get you an extra turn because they're weak to it. It's very interesting, it's fun, and I enjoy talking to the characters and moving through the world. It's very beautifully designed. It's taken me a bit of time to figure out what it is that's causing me hesitation, but these are some things that I do know that I really like about it. So many people are just saying great game, and I want to be there. I say good game right now, but there's a big part of it, it's making me hesitate. I think a big part of that is that it feels like it's dragging me along too. So on top of the protagonist and how it feels a bit like the grand adventure is not as grand as it could be, it feels like I'm being dragged along when I wanted to sit there and enjoy it. So that's the relax and reflect rule. They have all the pieces there, but the pace is just missing. And I want to be clear, I actually like that they've gone away from the Persona style of being in a city or village and being just cozy and talking with your friends and getting to know them. That's cool, but let's leave that for the Persona series. There's a place and a time for that. Metaphor had to be different, and it definitely is. The problem is that grand adventure is moving too fast, and the main character isn't believable in the role they've put him in. Now, it's a common problem in games. They do things that other games do, but they don't do any of them better than any of the respective games that they're sort of reflecting. So it's hard to stick out for that reason when you do that. I would argue that the JRPG combat system is the best in its respective genre. With the archetypes, how easy it is to respec, how difficult fights force you to change your party composition. It's fun, it's badass, and it's just a cool strategy aspect to it. I love Hazme. This little guy's freaking awesome, great story, well written, awesome design, 10 out of 10. It reminds me a bit of Blue Dragon if you've ever played that. The archetypes work a bit like the shadows in that game. The adventure itself also has a bit of Blue Dragon in it. Blue Dragon, again like Final Fantasy IX, but not Metaphor, has a bunch of cozy towns where you can walk around, get to know the townsfolk, or take your time in between traveling through the overworld. Not all towns look cozy. Some towns have a horrific, violent tree that will kill you, but it's still interesting to walk around and see the story behind it. It feels like the actual locations don't really have a story to tell sometimes. I realize there's a ton of world building, and it's very interesting, the race dynamics and learning about the races and how you can just talk to people on the streets and learn about how their race has been vilified, condemned, or in some cases raised up. How interesting it is to talk about the Clamar versus, I can't remember the name of the race, but essentially they're box heads. Just how interesting it is to talk to those different races and hear about this world that they're living in, and then reading your book and trying to achieve a utopia in the future and kind of recognizing that's where the game's going. In a sense, you can't get much more grand than that. But also in a sense, it doesn't feel grand at all because this main character doesn't feel like the one to me. Again, I am curious to see if people agree with me. Clearly a lot of people love the game, and I like it quite a bit. But love is where I draw the line so far. And that's the central question. Do I like metaphorrefantazio? That's the question of the video. Well, yes, I do. I'm still playing it, and I find the world super interesting. But this was about metaphorrefantazio Game of the Year. Is it worthy? Will we look back on this game as a Game of the Year candidate? The answer to that is that it's not doing enough for me. It's just not distinguishing itself, and the protagonist is just a little blah. We don't really, stand for anything besides wanting a utopia and doing the right thing. Which are great, but there's not much of an interesting dynamic aspect to this character. Like I said, there are games like the Zelda series where Link, the protagonist, doesn't have to do a lot. They just have to be cool or do their job, and that's good enough. Let the story tell itself, and then they're doing their job, and there's a bit of subtle character building off of that. But in Metaphor, us, the protagonist, are supposed to be the savior, the next king, the leader of the utopia that's talked about in the book that we're reading so much. But he's just the most boring protagonist. 20 hours in, I haven't seen any character development, and I don't find myself identifying with him or rooting for him in any way. I do root for him, but I don't find him interesting enough to like a lot. Stroll, Grius, Maria, Fabienne, all different stories. They're cool. I want them to succeed and get to know them. But it's a major problem. Katharina's also cool and would be an interesting main character, and I get it. They want the main character to be moldable. They need to be pliable. They need to be able to shift to how we want them to be. And that's what I think Mass Effect does so well with Commander Shepard. But in this game, the problem is that the main character is not flexible. They're just very unidirectional, and we don't have much effect in shaping their dialogue or their actual personality. There were times that I actually thought I was going to get a choice, and then I would click on that choice and the main character would say something like, "Oh, we probably better not say that. I want to be on their good side." In fact, I think I remember it was the moment when I could have told Luis's crony to screw off, if I remember right, but then I needed to actually lie and say that I was fighting. It was when I was talking to him, Luis himself. I lied and said that I needed to fight for him, and that's why I was doing this, because I wanted to get in on his inner circle. And when I tried to lie and basically say screw you, not lie, but just say screw you, it didn't let me. The main character was like, no, no, no. Or Gallica was like, no, no, we better not do that. We need to get in on his inner circle. So it's just interesting because I don't know why they even give us that option, because what that allowed me to do was to then see, whoa, I'm not really the main character. This person is. I don't have much say in this, you know? I still think there's a lot of good writing, but moments like that really detract from the experience. The metaphorrefantazio is fun, it's cool, I love what it's doing for the genre. I think it's a really good game. Even still, maybe game of the year, but it's not amazing to me right now. I like it, but I don't love it.